The fog pressed against the panes of our sitting room at Baker Street like a thing alive, and the small clock on the mantel had just struck 9:20 when the bell at the street door rang with a violence that brought my hand to my coffee cup. Holmes did not look up from the Times. "Watson," he said, "you will, I think, in the next minute, be obliged to put down your cup. There is, on the pavement at this moment, a four-wheeler with 2 horses, drawn up at our door, in which there is a person of upwards of 50 whose carriage has, in the past 40 minutes, been driven at an unusual speed from a not inconsiderable distance, and whose hat, a silk hat of I should say between 4 and 5 years' wear, recently brushed, with a small narrow black mourning band of the kind a gentleman wears for some person of his immediate establishment, but not of his immediate family, who has died within the last 72 hours, has been in the cab, not removed." I rose. Mrs. Hudson's tread came up the stair. The card she set on the salver bore, in the small italic of an exceedingly proper engraving, the name Mr. Cyril Tremaine, Permanent Under Secretary, Foreign Office, and, in pencil at the foot in a hand which was not Mr. Tremaine's own, the small line, "On a matter which Sir Edward will not himself communicate by letter. Show him in, Mrs. Hudson, with my compliments." She showed him in. He was, I observed at once, exactly the figure my friend had described. A tall, very erect, well-formed man, with grey hair drawn back from a high forehead, the small, careful side whiskers of the diplomatic service, and the steady, deep-set eyes of a man whose professional life had been the management of small matters which the public never read of in the newspapers. He carried his silk hat in his hand. The mourning band on the brim was indeed a fresh band, of perhaps 3 days. "Mr. Holmes." "Pray sit down, Mr. Tremaine. Watson." "My colleague, Dr. Watson, in whose presence anything." "You say to me may be set down as said to me alone. I have, as it happens, been expecting you for upwards of 40 minutes. The permanent Under-Secretary did not betray any surprise. He was, in his profession, the kind of man whom no statement on earth was likely to surprise. He sat in the chair opposite. He set his hat on his knee. "Mr. Holmes, I had been intending to send a private telegram from Charing Cross at 9:20 on the way up. I did not, in the event, send it. I came directly. The matter is of the kind which the Foreign Office prefers not to commit to the wire. Quite so. I have come at the personal request of Sir Edward Holdsworth, the Foreign Secretary, who is at this moment in his private room at the office, and who would, were he able, have come himself. He has not come because, were he to have come this morning, his absence between 9:30 and noon would itself be remarked upon. And the matter, Mr. Tremaine, is Mr. Holmes, the body of Sir James Carstairs, K.C., late of Her Majesty's Diplomatic Service, who has been for some years the senior cipher officer at the office, and who was found in his private room on the 2nd floor of Whitehall Chambers, the small private set of chambers in which he, as a bachelor, has lived these many years, at 6:30 this morning, by his manservant Wilkes, dead in his chair at his writing desk, with a single bullet in the back of the head. Holmes set down the Times very gently. He drew the long-stemmed clay pipe from the rack, and did not, for upwards of 15 seconds, light it. "In Whitehall Chambers." "Yes." With the door, on the inside, locked, and the small key on the inside still in the lock. "With the window, a single sash giving on to the inner court, closed and latched on the inside. With the small private safe, which is set into the wall of the bedroom adjoining, undisturbed. The safe was, on Wilkes's first inspection at 6:30, locked, and the keys at this moment in my own pocket. With the writing desk, at which the body sits, the papers upon it in their usual orderly course, the dispatch box at the side of the desk locked. The fire in the grate, low, but not out. The gas of the standing lamp on the desk, low, but burning. The bullet, by the police surgeon's first examination at 7:20, lodged in the brain. The pistol, a small service revolver of an old pattern, on the carpet at his feet, on the side of the desk, perhaps 3 feet from his hand. And the police, Mr. Tremaine? Inspector Gregson of the Yard is, at this moment, with his sergeant in the chambers. The body has not yet been moved. The matter has not, by Sir Edward's express request, been communicated to any newspaper. It cannot, in the next 48 hours, be communicated to any newspaper, since Sir James was at his desk at the time of his death, engaged on a small matter of correspondence which the office cannot permit to come to public knowledge before the closing of next week. Indeed, on the afternoon of next Tuesday, Mr. Holmes, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, is to be received at the Lies Palace by the President of the French Republic, on the small private completion of a matter which has since the autumn been handled in correspondence by way of 3 persons, the President's chef de cabinet, our own ambassador in Paris, and Sir James himself at the office. The correspondence is of a kind which, were any portion of it to find its way into the German press between this morning and Tuesday next, would in particular cause Sir Edward to lose his position by Wednesday, and would, more seriously, very nearly cause the office to lose Tuesday's reception altogether. And the correspondence, at this moment, is Mr. Holmes, in part on the desk in the small front room of Sir James's chambers, where it has been, by his careful private habit, kept these last several weeks. It is in part in the small private safe set into the wall of the bedroom adjoining, to which Sir James himself, by Sir Edward's particular arrangement, was the only person in possession of the keys. The keys on the body were in his small left waistcoat pocket. They are now in mine. I have not, until you are at the chambers, opened the safe. You are wise. It is a question on which Sir Edward this morning was perfectly clear. The safe is to be opened only in the presence of yourself, of myself, and of Inspector Gregson. It is to be opened only after you have had the opportunity to satisfy yourself that the room and the body in it have given up to you everything they will give up. The office will, on the strength of your eye on the room, accept what you read. And the time of death, by the police surgeon, is, in the doctor's first careful judgment at 7:20 this morning, between 1:30 and 3 in the small hours of this morning. You will permit me, Mr. Tremaine, 1 or 2 further questions. Pray ask them, Mr. Holmes. Sir James Carstairs was a bachelor of what habits? Of the most regular habits of his profession. He had been at his desk at the office every working day from 9:20 until upwards of 7. He had returned to his chambers at 7:30. He had dined at his club, the Travellers. At 8, he had been, by 10, back at the chambers. He had read at his fire until 11:30. He had retired at 12. He had, on Saturdays, walked in the park before luncheon. He had, on Sundays, attended early communion at St. Margaret's. He had, on every Monday evening these many years, taken supper at the small private rooms in St. James's of his older sister, Lady Greville, who is the widow of Sir Henry Greville of the India Office. He had no other social life. He had no other social life of which the office was aware. The permanent Under-Secretary regarded my friend for one long moment with the steady, deep-set eyes of his profession. Mr. Holmes, Sir James, was a man of the most particular discretion. If he had, in the past, several years, formed any other small private connection, he had not in any way, by any small irregularity at the office or at the chambers, communicated it. That is in his nature. It is also why he was at his desk on the matter of the Tuesday correspondence. Quite so. And the manservant Wilkes has been with him these many years. He is a man of the steady country sort, the son of a small farmer in Kent, who came up to London as a young man. He is, by my long observation, a steady, sober, very particular servant. He had not, on his coming up at 6 this morning to make Sir James's coffee, the smallest expectation that anything was wrong. He had let himself into the small back kitchen at 5:20. He had set the kettle. He had taken the morning paper from the mat. He had, at 6:20, knocked on the door of the front room, for Sir James was always at his desk before 6:30. There had been no answer. He had knocked a second time. He had then, on his own account, gone round by the small back stair to the small back door of the front room, which is not, in the strict sense, ordinarily used, and had opened it with the second key on his own ring, which Sir James had given him for emergencies. He had found the room as I have described it. The door of the front room, that is, the principal door by which a visitor would have entered, was locked from the inside, with the inside key in the lock. The window was closed and latched, the body was in the chair, and the small back door Mr. Tremaine, by which Wilkes entered, was that on his entry at 6:20, locked? It was. From which side? From the inside, with the small bolt at the foot, on the inside drawn. He had, accordingly, on his account, drawn the bolt himself with the second key, by means of a small careful arrangement of the lock which permitted, on the strength of an extra small turn, the bolt to be released from the corridor. That is unusual. It is the only entry of its kind in the building. Sir James had, when he first took the chambers, had the lock specially fitted. He had wished, in the strict sense, that no person should be able to enter the room at all, unless either he himself or Wilkes, by means of the small careful turn, had set it open. Mr. Tremaine. Yes, Mr. Holmes, you will give me 1/2 hour. We shall, at 10:30, be at Whitehall Chambers. The four-wheeler was waiting. The fog, by the time we had taken our seats in it, had thickened into the kind of London March murk which presses on the lungs and turns the gas lamps into small yellow ghosts. Holmes did not speak in the cab. He sat with the long clay pipe between his teeth, his eyes on the small streaked window, and the small hard line about his mouth which I had come, in long acquaintance, to recognise as the sign of a problem on which he was already 3/4 of the way to a solution. The permanent Under-Secretary, in the corner opposite, did not interrupt him. We drew up at Whitehall Chambers at 10:30 precisely. The building was a tall, plain, brick and stone affair set back a fraction from the street, with a green painted door, 2 stone steps, and a small brass plate at the side that read only Whitehall Chambers, Private. It was a small select set of chambers occupied by a particular kind of senior bachelor of the service. There were 6 private suites. Sir James's was on the 2nd floor, at the south-east corner. Inspector Gregson met us at the foot of the staircase. He was that morning in plain clothes, with the steady, slightly worried expression of a man who has been told, by his own commissioner before 9, that the matter on his desk is to be settled with the smallest possible noise. Mr. Holmes. Inspector. The room has not been disturbed? Has not been touched, sir, beyond what was necessary for the police surgeon's first examination. The body has not yet been moved. My sergeant is at the door. Wilkes the manservant is in the small back kitchen, and the principal door has been kept locked from outside since 7 o'clock. We have come in and gone out only by the small back door. We climbed the staircase. The carpet was a steady dark red of patient years' wear. The corridor on the 2nd floor was lit, even at 10:30, by gas, for the building did not admit a great deal of natural light to the inner halls. At the south-east corner, the principal door of Sir James's set was, as the inspector had said, closed and locked. The sergeant, in plain clothes, stood at the head of the back stair landing. We went in by the small back door. The set of chambers consisted, I observed at once, of 3 rooms in a railway carriage arrangement, the small back kitchen at the rear, the bedroom in the middle, and the front room, which was Sir James's writing room and library, at the front overlooking the inner court. The principal door of the set gave into the front room directly. There was, in the strict sense, no hall. The front room was a long, narrow, well-proportioned room, with a single sash window on the south wall, the writing desk set perhaps 2 feet from the window, the wing chair which had been Sir James's reading chair by the fireplace on the further wall, and a small Pembroke table, on which an empty whisky glass, a small decanter, and the morning's Times of the previous day were neatly arranged. The body was at the writing desk. Sir James Carstairs had, in life, been a man of perhaps 5'10", slightly stooped, with grey hair thinning at the crown and a clean-shaven face. He sat now in the writing chair, with his head fallen forward, his hands resting palm down on the blotter. He wore his evening coat of black, his white waistcoat, and his evening tie still, that is to say, he had not, on returning from the Travellers at 10 the previous night, retired and changed. He had been, on the natural course of his evening, intending to do further work at his desk before, retiring at upwards of midnight, and had, in the strict sense, not had time. The wound in the back of the head was a small clean wound. There was very little blood. The pistol on the carpet at his feet was a small service revolver, a Webley of an older pattern, of the kind which a gentleman of his service might in fact, on retirement, have kept in his own bottom drawer. Holmes did not, at first, approach the body. He stood in the doorway, very still, with his hands clasped behind his back, for upwards of half a minute looking at the room. He looked in particular at three things, at the writing desk, at the wing chair, and at the small Pembroke table. Then he crossed to the writing desk. I remained with Mr. Tremaine and Inspector Gregson at the door. Watson. Yes, Holmes. Pray observe, in particular, the position of the body in the chair. I observed it. It is, Holmes, the position of a man who has been sitting upright at his desk and has, on a single shot, fallen forward. It is the position of such a man, Watson. Yes. Observe, however, the small detail on the inner side of the chair back, just beneath the headrest. I looked. The chair was a tall mahogany writing chair with a leather-cushioned back. On the inner side of the back, just beneath the headrest, on the leather, there was a small dark smear, perhaps the length of 1.5 inches, of the kind which a man's collar, when oiled with a small quantity of macassar oil from his hair, may on his lying back briefly leave. The smear, however, was in the wrong place. It was in the wrong place because it was in the centre of the leather, low, that is, at the level of perhaps the third vertebra of the man's neck. A man of Sir James's height, leaning back in his own writing chair, would have left such a smear, if at all, 3 inches higher. The chair Holmes has been adjusted. The chair Watson has been adjusted, by the small turning of the screw at the foot, by 1.5 inches, since the smear was made. The smear was made by Sir James himself on a previous occasion, perhaps weeks ago. The chair has been raised by another's hand since. To what end? To the end, my dear Watson, of altering, by a fraction, the angle at which the bullet would, on its entry in the back of the head, on a man at the writing desk, fall. He bent further over the body. I observed with my professional eye that his hand passed within 1 inch of the back of the head and did not touch. The angle of entry, Watson, your professional view. The bullet, Holmes, has entered the back of the head at a steady downward angle of perhaps 15 degrees. The shot, accordingly, was fired by a person standing somewhat behind and slightly above the seated man. Standing on what? I considered. On nothing extraordinary, Holmes. On the floor. The shooter was simply taller, or the chair was lower. The chair has by the smear been raised 1.5 inches. The shooter, accordingly, was on the floor, behind the chair, and the chair itself at the moment of the shot was at its present height, that is, the height to which it has been raised since the smear was made. The angle of entry, 15 degrees, is the angle at which a person of perhaps 5 feet 11, standing immediately behind the chair, on the carpet, could fire a small service revolver into the back of a headset at its present elevation. Then the murderer, Holmes, was a person of about 5 feet 11, was a person who had in the past 3 or 4 days, on some small private pretext, been in this room alone for at least 60 seconds, and had used the time to turn the screw at the foot of the chair, was a person who knew, in particular, that on the night in question, Sir James would be at his desk, alone, between 11 and 12, and who was, in the strict sense, a person whom Sir James would have admitted into the room, in his evening clothes, after his return from the Travellers at 10, without raising the slightest alarm. He was admitted, Watson, by Sir James himself, by the principal door of the set, between 10 and 1/4 past, on Sir James's own hand on the lock. He was admitted on the strength of an appointment which Sir James had been expecting, for the small whisky decanter on the Pembroke table, you will observe, has been set out with 2 glasses, of which only 1 has been used. Sir James had set out the second glass for the visitor. The visitor, on entering, declined the whisky. He sat, I should say, in the wing chair by the fireplace, for a considerable period, talking. The cushion of the wing chair has, by the small indentation, been sat in at recent date. The conversation, on whatever subject it concerned, lasted perhaps an hour or more. He moved to the writing desk itself. He did not lift any of the papers. He looked at the small array of objects, the inkstand, the blotter, the pen tray, the small desk clock, and the small open dispatch case at the side of the desk, on which a single sealed envelope, addressed in a careful upright hand to His Excellency the Comte de Brienne, Chef de Cabinet, Lys Palace, Paris, was lying, ready for the morning's bag. Mr. Tremaine, yes, Mr. Holmes, this envelope on the dispatch case is the principal document in the matter of next Tuesday. It contains the small careful summary, in Sir James's own hand, of the proposals which the President is to communicate to His Royal Highness on Tuesday afternoon. It was, by Sir James's standing arrangement, to have been sealed last evening at 11:30, taken by Wilkes at 6:30 this morning to the office, and dispatched by the 8 o'clock bag to Paris.
It is sealed. It is sealed.
With Sir James's own seal?
With Sir James's own seal.
I have looked at it. The wax is fresh, perhaps 8 or 9 hours old. The impression is correct. Quite so. Watson, you will observe the small piece of evidence which is the central piece of evidence on the desk. I looked. I confess I did not, at first, see it. The blotter, Watson. The blotter. I bent. The blotter was a clean, fresh, undisturbed piece of green blotting paper. There was in the centre of it the faint mirrored imprint in lavender ink of a single piece of writing, the writing which had been, in the past hour or so before death, blotted upon it. The mirrored imprint was, with care, legible. It was not, however, the imprint of the careful upright hand of Sir James Carstairs. It was the imprint of a different hand entirely, a smaller, more sloping hand, in lavender ink, of which only a few words were entirely clear. The words I could read, with some patience, were, my dear J, for the last time I beg you, and then, lower, if you persist I shall, and then, yours always, R. I looked up. Holmes. Yes, Watson. The visitor, before the shot, sat at the desk and wrote a letter. The letter has been, since the shot, removed. The visitor has taken the letter with him. The visitor has, however, in the small careful corner of his own panic, forgotten the blotter. He forgot the blotter. He forgot, my dear Watson, the blotter. They generally do. He bent further over the desk. Mr. Tremaine. Yes, Mr. Holmes, this letter, by my reading of the imprint, is the letter of a person on terms of considerable intimacy with Sir James, who has been pressing him on a particular matter for some weeks, and who has, at the time of writing this letter, reached the small careful sentence in any such correspondence in which the writer is at last threatening, in plain English, to take some serious step. That is the substance, Mr. Holmes, and the writer's initial is R. Is R. And the ink is lavender. It is. Mr. Tremaine. Yes. Will you tell me, please, the name of the lady who has, in recent months, been writing to Sir James Carstairs in lavender ink? The permanent Under-Secretary did not, for upwards of 10 seconds, answer. He looked at Inspector Gregson. The inspector, in plain clothes by the door, did not move. Then Mr. Tremaine said, very quietly, Mr. Holmes, the name of the lady is the small particular reason that Sir Edward Holdsworth this morning sent for you and not for the yard alone. Quite so. The name, please. The Lady Rosamond Marchmont. The widow of the late Lord Marchmont, who was killed in the Egyptian campaign. Yes, the first cousin, once removed of the present Foreign Secretary. Yes. And, let us be plain, Mr. Tremaine, the lady whose private affairs with Sir James have been, in the past year, the small private knowledge of perhaps a dozen persons in the office. Of perhaps a dozen. Mr. Holmes, you will permit me one final question on the matter at this stage, Mr. Tremaine, and I shall ask Inspector Gregson, please with your assent, to step into the corridor while you answer it. The inspector, on Mr. Tremaine's quiet glance, stepped at once into the corridor. The question, Mr. Holmes, the Lady Rosamond Marchmont, in the past 3 months, has been pressing Sir James toward a particular step. What was that step? Marriage. Mr. Holmes. And Sir James had, in the past 3 months, declined. Sir James had declined. He had declined not because he did not love her, for he had loved her these several years, but because, by the standing rule of the senior cipher service, a marriage at his level required, by formal application, the personal consent of the Foreign Secretary, and the Foreign Secretary on a small, careful private interview last November had quietly declined to give it. Sir Edward had declined to give it because the lady is his own near cousin, and because the small private appearance of the matter would have been, in the eyes of the service, a great public embarrassment. And the lady accordingly, in lavender ink, in the past 3 months, has been pressing him. Has been pressing him, Mr. Holmes. And Sir James, in the past 3 months, has been refusing. Has been refusing. And on the night in question, the lady came to Whitehall Chambers. Mr. Holmes, it is the only honest reading of the imprint on the blotter. A person on terms of intimacy. Lavender ink. The initial R. The hour of the shot, between 1:30 and 3. Wilkes had, by his own account, been since 10 the previous night in the small kitchen until midnight, and from midnight in the small servants' room across the inner court. He could not see the principal door from the servants' room. The principal door of the set, accordingly, between midnight and 3, could be admitted by Sir James, and only Sir James, to any caller, by the small private bell at the front. It was admitted. The caller was the Lady Rosamond Marchmont. The permanent Under-Secretary drew, very slowly, one breath. Mr. Holmes. If that is your reading, then the matter Sir Edward Holdsworth this morning at 8:30 feared most. It is, however, not, Miss Tremaine, the whole matter. I beg your pardon. The Lady Rosamond was in this room with Sir James Carstairs at perhaps 1 o'clock, and perhaps later. She wrote, at this desk, a letter to him in lavender ink, a letter which has since the shot been taken from the desk. She did not, however, fire the bullet. She did not. She did not, Mr. Tremaine. She did not, because the angle of entry, the height of the chair, the smear on the leather, the position of the body, the position of the pistol, all suggest to my eye a person of about 5'11", standing behind the chair. The Lady Rosamond Marchmont is, by my recollection of her at the Royal Academy 2 summers ago, a lady of perhaps 5'4". She could not have struck the angle. There was, accordingly, on the night in question, in this room, in the small hours, in addition to Sir James and the lady, a third person. A third person. A third person, Mr. Tremaine. A man of about 5'11", who had in some manner come into the chambers, who stood behind the chair as Sir James sat down at the desk, who fired the single shot, who arranged the small fittings of the room, the chair screw, the pistol on the carpet, the lock of the principal door, and who departed by the small back door, by means of the small private extra turn of the lock, and who took the lady's letter with him, leaving, in the small careful corner of his haste, only the imprint on the blotter. And the lady, Mr. Tremaine, has either, at the moment of the shot, been already gone from the room by the principal door, on her own going home, at perhaps 2, or has been a witness. Mr. Holmes. There is, however, one further small particular point, Mr. Tremaine. The principal door at 6:30 this morning was locked from the inside. The window at 6:30 was latched from the inside. The third person, accordingly, departed by the small back door. The small back door, on Wilkes's coming up at 6:30, was, however, not latched on the inside. It was locked from the corridor by the special outside turn, the same turn which Sir James had fitted when he first took the chambers. This is the small particular point. The small back door, by its construction, can be locked from outside only by a person who has either Sir James's own key or Wilkes's own key. The third person, accordingly, had a key. The third person, Mr. Tremaine, had a key. Whose key? That, Mr. Tremaine, we shall in the next quarter of an hour, with your permission, ask Wilkes. We sent the inspector back into the corridor for Wilkes. The manservant came up from the small back kitchen with the steady tread of a man who had, in his long service in London, on more occasions than he had ever supposed, been required to walk into a parlour and answer an unexpected question. He was a small, neat, very careful man, with grey hair brushed close to his head, a small, clean-shaven face, and the steady eyes of a perfectly honest servant. Wilkes. Yes, sir. Mr. Holmes will please ask you a small question or two. At your pleasure, sir. Wilkes. Yes, Mr. Holmes. There has been on the small back door's special lock, in the strict sense, a third key. The manservant did not at first answer. He said, at last, sir. Yes, Wilkes. There has been, since last autumn, a third key. It had been cut, by Sir James's own arrangement, by the small private locksmith of the building. Sir James had given it to me in the small back kitchen, at upwards of 9 in the evening, and had said only that I was, in particular, on no account ever to mention the matter to any person. He had not told me to whom the third key would, in due course, be given. To whom did he, in due course, give it? He gave it, sir, on the small back stair at 11:20 in the evening, to a lady whom I had let in by the small back door at 10:20. What lady, Wilkes? The lady, sir, who had been, since last spring, calling at the small back door on Tuesday and Friday evenings between 10 and 11, and leaving by the same door at upwards of 2 in the morning. The Lady Rosamond Marchmont, sir. Quite so. And Wilkes, I shall ask you, please, on your strict honour, one further question. Is there in the building, in the keeping of any further person, a fourth key? The manservant looked, for one long careful moment, at the floor. I had not, sir, until last Friday week, known of any fourth key. Last Friday week. On that Friday, sir, at upwards of 5 in the afternoon, on Sir James's coming home from the office, he had, in the small back kitchen, on his own quiet account, told me a thing that had been troubling him for upwards of a fortnight. He had told me that he had, on the previous Saturday, on a small private call by Lady Rosamond's nephew, a young gentleman by the name of Mr. Reginald Marchmont, at the Chambers, suspected that Mr. Marchmont, on a small careful pretext of fetching his aunt's gloves, which she had left on the side table, had, by means of a small piece of soft wax and a clean handkerchief, taken an impression of the small back door key from the small ledge in the bedroom where Sir James kept his own key during the day. Sir James had not at the time challenged the young gentleman. He had, however, by the second week, become satisfied that a fourth key had, by Mr. Marchmont's hand, been cut at a small private locksmith in Pimlico. He had not decided what to do. He had told you on the Friday. He had told me, sir. He had asked me only to be on the alert. And on the night in question, between midnight and 3, you were in the small servant's room across the inner court. Yes, sir. You did not see any person enter or leave by the small back door. I did not, sir. But, Wilkes. Yes, sir.
At the small back door this morning at 6:30, on the bolt at the foot. The bolt, in the strict sense,
which only Sir James's key or your own can release from the corridor, what was the position of the bolt when you applied your key? The manservant drew a long breath. The bolt, sir, was already half released. Half released. The small particular turn which a person who has not done the lock for upwards of 10 years would, on a single attempt, have only half completed. The lock, sir, by its construction, requires a small turn of 3/4. A person new to it who has practised on a wax impression once or twice will often only achieve a half turn. And the half turn at 6:15 was that, sir, of a person who had, since the small hours, been at the small back door from outside, fumbling with the lock for upwards of 3 minutes, and had finally given it up at perhaps half turn, leaving the bolt neither fully home nor fully out. I had, on my own coming up at 6:30, given the lock the small extra quarter turn that finished it. Wilkes. Yes, sir, you have been very useful to me. Return now to the small back kitchen. He went out. The permanent under-secretary by the door said only, Mr. Reginald Marchmont. Yes, Mr. Tremaine. He is the young man who on his uncle's death without male issue will in due course, in the strict sense on his aunt's death, inherit the Marchmont peerage. He is. And his aunt at this moment is perhaps the woman whom Sir James, by some small private decision in the past fortnight, had at last persuaded himself to consider marrying, in spite of Sir Edward's previous private declining of consent. Yes. And were Sir James in fact to marry her, the issue of the marriage would, Mr. Tremaine, by Lady Marchmont's age, she is, by my recollection, only in the middle 30s, perhaps very plausibly include a son. The son, by the special remainder of the Marchmont peerage, would, on the lady's death, take the title in preference to the nephew. Mr. Holmes. The young Mr. Reginald Marchmont, Mr. Tremaine, has had every reason to wish that the small particular pressing of Sir James toward marriage should be definitively prevented. He has, since some weeks past, been preparing the small mechanical means by which such a prevention could, on a suitable evening, be effected without the lady's own knowledge. He has cut himself, on a small wax impression, a 4th key. He has, by some quiet reconnaissance of these chambers in the past fortnight on a previous social call, observed the writing chair and turned the screw at its foot. He has been, these past nights, watching the small back court at 1:30 of every night, and on the night in question, between 1:30 and 3, at the moment his aunt left the chambers by the principal door on her own foot, he was in the inner court, with the 4th key, at the small back door, by means of which, on her departure and on Sir James's return to the desk, he let himself in, walked through the bedroom, came up behind Sir James at the writing chair, and fired the single shot. And on his way out, in his haste, he attempted the small back door's lock from the corridor, but, by Wilkes's own evidence just now, did not fully complete the turn. He left the bolt at half home. He carried with him the lavender letter from the desk, which his aunt had written, and which would, if found, make her at once the chief suspect. He left, however, the blotter. He left the blotter. He left the blotter, Mr. Tremaine. They generally do. We did not, in the next quarter of an hour, take any small further action in the chambers. The body was, on the inspector's quiet word, removed at last to the mortuary at 12. The principal door and the small back door were sealed by Inspector Gregson. The dispatch case with the sealed envelope to the Comte de Brienne was, at Mr. Tremaine's express instruction, taken by him in person to the office, where, on Sir Edward's own initial, the envelope was placed in the dispatch bag of the 8 o'clock train to Paris on the Saturday morning. The reception at the Lies Palace on the Tuesday afternoon went, in the strict sense, off entirely as planned. The investigation by which Mr. Reginald Marchmont was at last apprehended was conducted, on Sir Edward Holdsworth's quiet personal request, between Holmes himself, Inspector Gregson, and a single trusted officer of C Division. It took, in the event, 3 days. The 4th key was found, on the 2nd day, in the small bottom drawer of the young man's writing desk at his rooms in the Albany. The small private receipt of the locksmith in Pimlico for the young Mr. Marchmont had, in the strict sense, paid for the cutting of the key in his own name, on the small, unwise impulse of a young man who has had an account at his locksmith for several years, was found by C Division at the locksmith's on the same afternoon. The lavender letter, which Holmes had in the strict sense all along fully expected the murderer to have burned within a quarter of an hour of his return to the Albany, had not in fact been burnt, it had been kept on. The young man's own private decision, in the small inside pocket of his evening coat, in the careful imitation of a small piece of patient blackmail material, which he had decided he might in due course present to his aunt as the means by which the inheritance of the family country property, which would on her death without legitimate male issue go in the entail to her late husband's nephew, that is to himself, might be guaranteed. He had not, on his private weighing, foreseen that Holmes would, by the third day, on the evidence of the imprint on the blotter, the smear on the chair back, the half-turn of the small back door, and the locksmith's receipt at Pimlico, have his nephew at Bow Street. The lavender letter, on Inspector Gregson's quiet word at the door of the Albany, was at last produced from the inside pocket. The young Mr. Marchmont, on the production, did not deny. The trial of Mr. Reginald Marchmont was held at the Central Criminal Court, on the small further private arrangement of Sir Edward Holdsworth, in a closed session in the late summer. The arrangement was unusual. It was, however, by Sir Edward's private application to the Lord Chief Justice, on the strength of the small particular Foreign Office matters, which the lavender letter and certain other small papers in the case touched upon. Granted. The plea was guilty. He was sentenced to death. The recommendation to mercy made by the jury, on the strength of the small careful private testimony at the trial of two persons whose names are not, on this account, ever to be set down, was forwarded to the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary, on the strength of the closed session and of the small further private considerations, in the autumn commuted the sentence to penal servitude for life. The Lady Rosamond Marchmont herself had, by Holmes's careful reading of the matter, left Whitehall Chambers by the principal door at upwards of 2 a.m, on Sir James's accompanying her down the staircase to a private hansom which had been, by Sir James's standing arrangement, waiting for her at the corner of the small lane. She had not, in the strict sense, been a witness to the shot. She had, however, on the subsequent week, on the strength of the news of Sir James's death in the Saturday morning's Times, immediately suspected her nephew. She had been, in the strict sense, on the morning of the discovery, the only person in England who had any reason to suspect a particular member of her own family. She had not, however, in the days that followed, in any way come forward. She had not come forward because, on her own private weighing, she had been afraid that, were she to come forward to the police with her suspicion, the small private matter of her correspondence with Sir James in lavender ink for several years, and the small further matter of the small back door of Whitehall Chambers on Tuesday and Friday evenings between 10 and 2, should, by the public press, be very widely commented upon. She had been afraid, in particular, that the small particular embarrassment to her cousin Sir Edward would be more than she could ask of him to bear. She had, accordingly, decided to do nothing. She had been undone in this private decision only because Holmes, on the morning of the third day, in the small drawing-room of her house in Mount Street, in the presence of Sir Edward Holdsworth, very gently set out for her the substance of the matter, as he had read it from the imprint on the blotter and from the half-turned bolt of the small back door. She did not, on his setting out, attempt to deny. She gave, in the small drawing-room, on Sir Edward's careful kindly request, the small particular evidence which Sir Edward had, on his own private weighing, in the past 3 days, decided was the only piece of evidence which would, in the closed session at the Central Criminal Court, allow the matter to be settled in such a way that her name should not, on the strict reading of any newspaper of any country, ever appear. It did not, in the event, appear. Holmes himself, on the small further private undertaking which Sir Edward had asked of him at the Foreign Office on the afternoon of the third day, kept the matter in his own private case file, locked in the small tin dispatch box at Baker Street, on the small careful side of the cases which I had been instructed not, on his lifetime, to publish. The instruction had not, on his lifetime, been put aside. It is on his particular permission, given on a quiet evening in his small bee-keeping cottage at Sussex many years afterwards, that I am at last able to set the matter down, on the further small condition that I should not, in any portion of the account, set down the lady's true name. The name Rosamond Marchmont, accordingly, is not the lady's true name, it is the name Holmes himself, on the small careful kindness of his old age suggested to me, on the strength of a Christian name and a surname which had no living connection to her own. The lavender ink, the small back door, the smear on the writing chair, the imprint on the blotter, and the half-turn of the bolt are, however, exactly as he read them on the morning of the discovery, in the small front room of Whitehall Chambers. Sir Edward Holdsworth, on the strength of the closed session, kept his position at the Foreign Office. He retired some years afterward, in the proper time, on a peerage. He died not long after that. Sir James Carstairs was buried, on the morning of the 3rd day after his death, in the family vault at Carstairs in Scotland, with the small private attendance of his older sister Lady Greville, of his manservant Wilkes, and of Sir Edward Holdsworth himself. The office obituary made the small dignified reference to a most distinguished servant of the Crown, taken from us in the course of his duty, at his own writing desk, at the hand of an unhappy young man of his social acquaintance. It did not name the unhappy young man. It did not name the lady. The matter at the Lyes Palace on the Tuesday afternoon, on which the late Sir James had on the night of his death been at his writing desk completing his final instruction, went, on the strength of his sealed envelope, in due course, between His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and the President of the French Republic, on the small careful course Sir James had set out. The matter is the small private subject of upwards of 2 of the present century's larger pieces of European history. The full substance of it has not yet, even in the year in which I am setting this down, been made public. I have, in this narrative, on Holmes's own permission of his retirement, set down only as much of it as can be set down without harm. It was, on the morning of the discovery, in our sitting room at 221B Baker Street, at upwards of 9:20, that the matter began with the four-wheeler at our door and the silk hat with the small narrow black mourning band. It was settled, in the strict sense, by Holmes's reading of an imprint in lavender ink on a clean piece of green blotting paper at 10:30 on the same morning. I have only, on this account, set down, by Holmes's permission, the small particular detail by which the matter was, on the strict reading of Holmes's own eye in the small front room of Whitehall Chambers, undone. The detail, my reader, was the green blotting paper. It is, in any case of the kind, the small particular thing the murderer most often forgets. I have, since the morning of the discovery, in the small careful corner of my own private writing desk at Queen Anne Street, kept on my own blotter, every Sunday evening, a fresh sheet of clean green blotting paper. I have done so, in particular, on Holmes's quiet recommendation, on the small private principle that, were any portion of one's correspondence to be on the night before set down upon it in lavender ink, the small careful imprint on the underside, by Monday morning would, on a single look at the morning's newspaper from the proper hand at the proper hour, give the matter away. It is the small particular precaution of every honest man in the writing rooms of London. The cab drew up at our door in Baker Street at 3:30 in the afternoon. The fog had, by then, let up. The pale March sun fell, slantwise, on the small steps. Holmes paid the cabman with the small careful courtesy he reserved for cabmen who had pulled a heavy fare. He came up the steps. He hung up his hat. He took down his violin from the corner. He played, for upwards of half an hour, a quiet old air of Mendelssohn's in the small grey afternoon light at the front window, while I, by the fire, with my notebook on my knee, set down, in the small careful corner of a fresh page, the first private notes of the Whitehall Chambers matter. The notes, on his quiet recommendation at 6 that evening, I locked the same night in the small tin dispatch box at the foot of his armchair. It was, in the strict sense, until the spring of his retirement at Sussex, the first and last time I ever wrote a single word of the matter for upwards of many years. I write it now in the small careful courtesy of his memory. The fire, on the hearth, has burnt low. The room, beyond the small lamp, is quiet. It is the small particular hour in any English writing room in which the proper reader in due course takes up the page.